Greetings. In our short video series, we're going to look at some recent press releases this week from various Federal Reserve governors, not from random inflation scaremongers in the media, but the people who actually decide monetary policy, and how they still think that hyperinflation is around the corner and they want to take destructive actions just because of the chance of hyperinflation that they think could be around the corner. Even though they've predicted about 100 of the last 0 hyperinflationary bouts, they still refuse to learn from their errors and amend their ways. So Jerome Powell has what is a relatively benign quote-unquote view on inflation and is getting pushed back at the Fed and elsewhere. So Chairman Powell says the inflation whipping through the economy. Now remember, it's not whipping through the economy. Current inflation is still very low, as I speak about in this video up here. But at least he says it will soon subside. So he's right about that. So he's relatively less screwed up in his mindset and understanding of economics than the others. But the others are pretty extreme because they just can't evolve past the 1970s, which was a pre-software era, a pre-atom era. No fewer than 5 Fed regional presidents have told CNBC it's time to pull back on the easy money policies, citing various levels of confidence in the economy, tempered by worries over inflation. Now, where to begin? First of all, the United States is only 25% of the world's money printing. Even if the United States stopped money printing, it would only be a 25% reduction in the world total, as I explain in great detail in this video up here, of which I do a monthly update. Secondly, they're conflating the Fed funds rate with the monetary creation, the quantitative easing. When you take the 0% Fed funds rate, which will stay at 0% forever, and combine that with the negative interest rate that is artificially engineered by quantitative easing, you see how incredibly distant it is for the Fed funds rate to ever get to 3% again. Yet most of these people who have no understanding of the economics of technology still say the 3% Fed funds rate number is the normal rate, and they use the word normalize. Whenever you hear the word normalize as regards to the Fed funds rate and interest rates, you should shudder in fear, because raising the Fed funds rate to 3% would cause a stock market correction of 50% and a real estate correction of 30 to 40%. That would wipe out everyone's home equity. Even people who have a fair amount of home equity would be in negative equity under that scenario. Now, fortunately, the stock market is intelligent and it will severely punish the Federal Reserve and the economy if the Federal Reserve even began on that path. So let me elaborate on how much distance they have to cover to get to what they consider normal, even though they've tried it about 6 times over the last 10 years. Every single time it has ended in failure because the atom itself has prevented them from taking that destructive action. Now consider further down in this article, you have another Fed governor, Philadelphia's Harker, who insists that inflation is more persistent and pervasive, and he's one of those 5 governors who says that that's the case. Every piece of data that he uses indicates it's not something that should be corrected through monetary policy, things like supply chain disruptions. As you can see over here, he says, there's also some evidence that they may not be so transitory, and that's a risk I'm worried about, the central bank official said in an interview about 2 hours before Powell's speech. Business contacts in Harker's region are seeing clear price pressures. Now here's the problem. Everyone reports the price pressures of only the anecdotal subcategories that have risen, like lumber has risen. We've heard that same thing about 1,000 times. Never the products that are not rising in price. Now you would think a Fed governor would actually look at the government's own indices, the CPI, to see the average of all prices, rather than cherry pick a few products that have risen in price and make his whole monetary thesis around that. He wants to tank the economy, tank housing prices, and tank the stock market because business contacts in the region report that a couple of things have risen in price and don't report the ones that have not risen in price. This is an extremely data deficient methodology via which to decide what monetary policy should be. And as I've mentioned many times, to lower the amount of quantitative easing and increase interest rates well away from the long-term downward trend that technological pressures have demonstrated for us would be catastrophic. You would think they would have learned by now, but they haven't. So you can read the rest of this article and see the links therein to see more about that. Now this is the Wuxia shadow rate that I talk about elsewhere. Very few people know about this, and even the Federal Reserve people apparently are not looking at this, even though they should. This is the effective Fed funds rate with quantitative easing. So when there was no quantitative easing and interest rates were high, that caused a major market correction. And they got up to as high as 2.4%. On March 15th, 2020, which I describe as the Netscape moment of economics, and I speak about in this video over here, They reduced the Fed funds rate hugely from 1.5% to 0 and started quantitative easing, which pushed the Wuxia shadow rate down to minus 2%, minus 1.89 at the moment, which is fair. That is what it should be. The long-term trend, as you can see from my cursor, is downward because technology is becoming a larger and larger percentage of the economy. Therefore, the amount of quantitative easing that can be done without inflation rises exponentially. And in fact, that is also the amount of quantitative easing that has to be done to halt deflation. So from minus 2%, to even get to 0, they would have to stop quantitative easing, and that's a major vertical rise. To get to 3% over here, what part of this trend line indicates that 3% will be normal? 3% could have been normal in the 1990s because there was no technological deflation in the economy to any significant degree. The atom was too small a portion of the world economy. But in 2006-07, raising the Fed funds rate this much caused the real estate bust, and they had to reverse it. When they did a lot of quantitative easing, that was the right thing to do, and that was 2014. When they decided to taper that caused a huge stock market correction. When they tapered again in 2018, that caused a stock market correction. They still want to do the same thing because economists are so theoretical that they just have no awareness of the damage to real people's lives that they cause. The jobs that are eliminated by the millions, the home equity that gets wiped out so that people's nest egg, because most people's net worth is really just their home equity in the United States, they have no care about that. And about the stock market. Destroying the stock market also destroys a lot of jobs. This falls on the lower classes and the corporate employee class of people, not the executives and the ultra wealthy at all. But they don't understand that. They just have memorized textbooks from the 1970s. They don't know what they're doing. They're still talking about this number getting all the way up to here. Don't look at the Fed funds rate. Look at this Wuxia shadow rate, because that gives you the composite of what the effective Fed funds rate is with money printing. Now, the good news is, since it's worldwide, the Federal Reserve could do something very stupid and not completely tank the U.S. economy and the world economy because the other central banks of the world are printing a lot of money. So they could probably go to 0 with not a huge amount of damage. But if they start to go above 0 and get to what they consider normal, 3%, that would be catastrophic. The market will simply not allow them to do that. If they even got to 0, there would be a correction that forces them to get back to minus 2 where it should be. And this number continues to drift downwards. Eventually, the Wuxia shadow rate will have to be retired because market forces will mandate that this money printing by the Federal Reserve has to be in the form of cash going directly to people. Why? Because this is bond buying through which they're engineering a negative interest rate in a very convoluted way. And as we see from this video up here, $17 trillion of bonds worldwide already have a negative interest rate. This is another aspect of the market itself, the technonomic medium of the world itself, and the connection between technology and economics eggheads, that this is not what they have to continue doing. They have to send cash directly to people. All market forces have cornered them into that reality. Just their dogma, their pig-headed textbookishness has prevented them from doing the right thing and obstructing human productivity and obstructing your prosperity. Think about that. Now, I know my videos don't have a huge amount of traffic, but I've been right all along. All my predictions for years and years about all this has been right all along. And eventually more people will see that we didn't have to cause so much human suffering had they just had a more enlightened understanding of the economics of technology. So I hope you found this to be very educational. And if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.